The court of Countess Drusilla was a world of brilliance and subtle menace, a place where velvet drapes hung heavy, chandeliers glittered like captured stars, and the scent of roses mingled with the faint, metallic tang of intrigue. Nobles in silks and brocades moved gracefully through the echoing halls, their laughter soft and measured, a careful performance meant to conceal ambition, envy, and fear. Drusilla herself, a vision of poise and elegance, walked among them with a calm that was both magnetic and unsettling. Her hair, the color of autumn chestnuts, framed a face of refined beauty, yet her dark eyes held an intensity that hinted at secrets hidden behind layers of charm. Those who encountered her could not help but be drawn to her, to marvel at the careful precision with which she navigated the treacherous waters of court life, balancing influence, desire, and the perpetual danger that accompanied her status. Drusilla had inherited not just a title, but an entire network of expectations, obligations, and power plays. As countess, she was responsible for maintaining her family's prestige, ensuring that alliances were kept intact, and orchestrating gatherings that were as much political theater as they were social occasions. Every gesture, every smile, every word spoken in her presence carried weight. Courtiers knew that a misplaced phrase could result in disgrace, a failed bow could invite suspicion, and a poorly timed joke might unravel years of carefully cultivated favor. In this world, appearances were everything, and Drusilla was a master at managing them. Her court was both her stage and her prison, a place where beauty and danger walked hand in hand, and where the line between admiration and envy was razor thin. The opulence of her surroundings served as both a shield and a weapon. Golden candelabras cast a soft glow on marbled floors, illuminating tapestries depicting past triumphs and battles, reminders of the lineage she represented and the legacy she was expected to protect. The scent of spiced wine and freshly baked bread filled the air during dinners, mingling with the rustle of fine fabrics and the subdued whispers of plotting courtiers. At first glance, one could imagine that the court was a sanctuary of refinement and sophistication, a place where intellectual debate mingled with music, art, and dance. Yet beneath the veneer of elegance lay a network of subtle threats, rivalries simmering just beneath polite smiles, secrets whispered in shadowed corners, and an unspoken understanding that power in Drusilla's world was never freely given and never guaranteed for long. Drusilla's reputation for intelligence and poise made her both respected and feared. Allies sought her counsel, while adversaries watched her every move, attempting to decipher the intentions behind her calm exterior. Even within her own household, a delicate balance had to be maintained. Servants who observed too closely could become liabilities. Confidants who spoke too freely risked their lives. She had learned early that trust was a commodity rarer than gold, and betrayal often came cloaked in loyalty. Her ability to maintain control over her domain was a testament to both her cunning and her relentless vigilance. Every smile she offered, every compliment she delivered, was calculated, a subtle maneuver designed to manipulate perception, ensure loyalty, or silence doubt. In the midst of this glittering world, there was a hidden tension that few could detect, but that shaped every moment of Drusilla's life. The public ceremonies, elaborate balls, and diplomatic receptions were carefully choreographed performances, masking a private reality that was far more volatile and dangerous. Drusilla carried within her a secret that could topple the delicate balance of her life and destroy everything she had built. It was a secret of the heart, a love forbidden by society, by family, and by the rigid expectations of nobility. Yet it was not mere infatuation. It was a consuming, all-encompassing passion, one that had the power to override reason and morality, compelling her toward choices that would shock the court and stain history with a dark and unforgettable story. The juxtaposition of her public and private selves created a tension that was palpable to anyone who knew her well. On one hand, she was the epitome of composure, a figure of grace who could inspire loyalty and admiration with a single word. On the other, she was consumed by an internal fire, a desire that demanded secrecy and cleverness, and that threatened to unravel the very foundation of her carefully constructed world. Even those closest to her could sense the occasional flicker of anxiety behind her measured demeanor, though few could understand the depth of what she carried. It was a tension between duty and desire, between control and vulnerability, and it set the stage for events that would soon plunge the court into chaos, horror, and intrigue. Beyond her personal struggles, Drusilla's world was defined by the strictures of her era. Society placed enormous pressure on noblewomen, dictating their behavior, their marriages, and even their survival. Love outside of sanctioned boundaries was considered scandalous, often punishable, and always dangerous. To openly defy these norms could mean exile, disgrace, or death. It is within this suffocating framework that Drusilla's forbidden love took root, a love that demanded secrecy but promised intense, immediate fulfillment. Her choices would soon reveal how desperation, obsession, and the human need for connection can push even the most disciplined individual toward actions that are unthinkable, morally complex, and utterly shocking. As the court of Countess Drusilla prepared for yet another lavish evening of spectacle, the audience is invited to look closer, to peer behind the gilded doors, past the sparkling chandeliers and embroidered gowns, into a realm where beauty masks danger, and where a woman's heart holds the key to a story of ambition, passion, and deadly consequence. It is within this glittering court that the tale of forbidden love, calculated decisions, and ultimate betrayal begins, a story that will expose the dark underside of opulence, the terrifying power of secrecy, and the lengths to which one will go to protect a love that cannot be openly acknowledged. Countess Drusilla's life of public perfection was a delicate facade, masking a private world consumed by a love that society would never forgive. The object of her secret desire was a man whose very presence defied the rigid structures of her court, a figure both dangerously alluring and perilously incompatible with her rank. He was a man of lower station, his lineage unremarkable, yet his intelligence, charm, and quiet intensity captivated Drusilla in ways that no noble suitor could. To the outside observer, their interactions might seem trivial, a fleeting glance, a subtle brush of the hand. But to Drusilla, each moment was imbued with a weighty intensity, a stolen fragment of happiness in a world governed by rules she could neither escape nor openly challenge. The secrecy of their meetings became a source of constant tension, a high-wire act of calculated timing and careful observation. They would rendezvous in shadowed corridors, in quiet gardens hidden from the view of the court, or behind screens within the walls of Drusilla's own chambers. Every word spoken was measured, every movement rehearsed, and every gesture scrutinized to ensure that no one would suspect the depth of their connection. It was a love that demanded vigilance, a passion that thrived in the shadows, and a risk that could destroy them both if discovered. The thrill of danger only heightened the intensity of their relationship, making each encounter an intoxicating mix of exhilaration and fear. Drusilla's mind was a battlefield of conflicting desires. On one side lay her loyalty to her family, her responsibilities as countess, and the unyielding demands of societal expectation. On the other lay her heart, beating wildly for a man whose love awakened in her a longing that had been suppressed for years. This duality consumed her, shaping her every thought and decision. She found herself increasingly isolated, unable to confide in even her closest confidants, fearful that any disclosure might result in betrayal. The psychological tension of maintaining appearances while nurturing such a dangerous secret began to erode the boundaries between caution and obsession. Every smile she offered the court, every gracious gesture, was carefully calibrated, concealing the turmoil that raged within. Letters became the lifeline of their romance, carefully crafted missives delivered under the noses of servants and guards. Each word was chosen with precision, conveying longing, affection, and the subtle urgency of clandestine meetings. The act of writing became both an art and a torment, for the risk of interception was constant. Drusilla's hand trembled as she sealed each letter, knowing that exposure could lead to scandal, disgrace, or worse. Yet the correspondence also solidified their bond, transforming fleeting encounters into a sustained emotional connection that deepened their passion while heightening the peril. The letters were fragments of a private world, a fragile sanctuary of truth hidden beneath layers of deception. Rumors began to swirl quietly within the court, as whispers always do where desire and ambition intersect. Some courtiers noted unusual behaviors, lingering glances, sudden disappearances, or a tension in Drusilla's otherwise flawless composure. None could confirm the nature of her secret, yet suspicion was a poison in itself, creeping into conversations and feeding the imagination of the gossips. Drusilla's mastery of perception became crucial. She learned to mask longing with politeness, fear with confidence, and obsession with charm. Every interaction was a calculated performance, designed to maintain the illusion of perfection while safeguarding the heart of her forbidden affair. The stakes of her clandestine love became increasingly severe as political and social pressures mounted. Marriage prospects were arranged with precision, alliances negotiated with care, and every action scrutinized for its impact on the family's reputation. Drusilla knew that discovery would not only jeopardize her love, but also threaten the stability of her court, her family's standing, and her own life. Yet the intensity of her desire outweighed caution, compelling her toward choices that blurred the line between prudence and recklessness. The court, with its glittering facade and deadly undercurrents, became both the arena of her most secret joy and the stage of her greatest peril. Emotionally, Drusilla oscillated between ecstasy and despair. Each stolen moment with her lover offered a reprieve from the rigidity of her public life, yet it also reinforced the impossibility of sustaining such passion within the constraints of her rank. Nights were restless with longing, days filled with tension as she navigated the labyrinthine politics of the court. Her heart was both a source of vitality and a burden of fear, for every act of affection carried the latent threat of exposure. The psychological weight of sustaining a forbidden love was immense, forcing her to develop extraordinary cunning, resilience, and patience. In essence, Drusilla was living a double life, one foot in the grandeur of her courtly responsibilities, the other in the shadows of a love that could consume her completely. The contrast between public and private life could not have been more stark. In daylight, she presided over banquets and ceremonies with impeccable grace, her laughter light, her words diplomatic. By night, her chambers became a haven of passion, secrecy, and whispered confessions. The contrast highlighted the extremity of her predicament, for every moment of joy was tempered by the ever-present risk of discovery. Drusilla's inner world was a storm of desire, fear, and strategy, a psychological tension that sharpened her intelligence but also edged her toward actions that were morally ambiguous, dangerous, and ultimately irreversible. This forbidden love was not merely an emotional indulgence. It began to dictate her every decision, shaping alliances, conversations, and even her movements within the court. It was a force that demanded both creativity and ruthlessness, compelling her to navigate complex social dynamics while guarding the deepest secret of her life. As the story of Countess Drusilla unfolds, it becomes clear that this secret passion is not a fleeting scandal, but a defining element of her existence. A love that will ignite a chain of events leading to betrayal, murder, and a dark chapter in the history of her court. The audience is drawn into the intensity of her desire, the thrill of her secrecy, and the inevitability of the choices that will lead her from love into a shadowed, terrifying path of consequence. The intensity of Countess Drusilla's forbidden love soon took a darker turn, transforming desire into obsession and obsession into a calculated plan of lethal precision. The court that once felt like a gilded stage of opportunity became, in her eyes, a labyrinth of threats. Every smile from a rival, every whispered rumor, every casual glance from a curious servant became a potential trigger for discovery. Drusilla's mind, sharp and cunning, began to shift from mere secrecy to action. She could no longer allow chance or the fragile loyalty of her courtiers to dictate her fate. If her love were to survive, drastic measures were necessary. The idea of poisoning, whispered in shadowed corridors of her imagination, began to take shape not as fantasy, but as an actionable strategy. Poison in the courts of Europe was a known tool, a dark art practiced in hushed secrecy by those desperate enough to wield it. Drusilla, ever the meticulous observer, began studying its use, methods, and historical examples with alarming precision. She learned which substances could induce subtle, gradual effects, and which could mimic natural illness, how small quantities could slip undetected into meals, drinks, or perfumes, and how timing could amplify both efficacy and concealment. Her research was methodical and obsessive, often conducted late at night, candlelight flickering across manuscripts and obscure treatises. Every experiment, whether on plants or substances she deemed harmless, sharpened her understanding of the mechanisms of death, the intervals of suffering, and the ways a fatal act could appear accidental or natural. It was a chilling education, one that merged intellect with a moral dissent she could scarcely acknowledge aloud, even to herself. Selecting her victims was the first critical step. Drusilla did not act on whim. She analyzed the court with precision, identifying who posed a threat to her secret and who could potentially compromise her forbidden love. Allies were few, and even the most trusted courtiers carried the possibility of betrayal. The decision to poison was not indiscriminate. It was targeted, deliberate, and strategic. Each choice carried weight, for every death risked exposure, suspicion, or retaliation. Drusilla weighed every relationship, every rivalry, and every personal motive, cataloging potential risks in her mind with meticulous care. The list of intended victims grew like a shadow around her, each name a delicate instrument in a deadly symphony she would soon conduct. Timing became paramount. Drusilla orchestrated her moves with the precision of a seasoned strategist, aware that the slightest misstep could unravel her plan entirely. She chose moments when the court was most distracted, banquets, festivals, or ceremonial gatherings where attention was diffused and chaos provided cover. Her preparations involved both patience and patience tested by nerves, a balancing act of anticipation and control. Ingredients were carefully acquired, hidden in plain sight or smuggled through trusted intermediaries. Servants were subtly manipulated, their routines guided without their full awareness, becoming instruments in a scheme they could never comprehend. Every step was calculated to ensure that the outcome would serve both the preservation of her love and the concealment of her actions. The psychological transformation was profound. Drusilla's mind oscillated between excitement, fear, and moral conflict. She was acutely aware that her intellect and meticulous planning had given her the power to alter lives irrevocably. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, anxiety simmered. Every cough, every sudden pallor among her courtiers became a source of intense scrutiny. Could she manage the chaos she would unleash? Would someone notice patterns, connections, or anomalies? Her intellect, once a tool for navigating diplomacy and politics, became a weapon in a more sinister arena. Her love, once a source of private solace, now demanded an orchestration of death and deception, leaving her grappling with a duality of desire and dread. Drusilla's interactions in the days leading to the act were filled with subtle tension. She maintained her composure during public appearances, concealing the storm within with elegance and charm. Courtiers, oblivious to the dark calculus unfolding, continued their ordinary routines, unaware of the deadly web being spun around them. Meanwhile, Drusilla's lover, the axis of her obsessive plan, remained largely unaware of the meticulous plotting, shielded from the moral and practical implications of the path she had chosen. Each stolen glance, each private exchange, became both a reinforcement of passion and a reminder of the lengths to which she was willing to go. Love and strategy became inseparably intertwined, her desire demanding action that ordinary morality would have condemned. The plan itself was multifaceted, designed to ensure maximum effect with minimal suspicion. Meals, beverages, and even ceremonial objects were considered as potential delivery methods. Drusilla accounted for the habits of her victims, their preferences, and vulnerabilities, weaving her knowledge of human behavior into a lethal blueprint. The psychological aspect was as critical as the physical. Panic, confusion, and fear among her targets would serve as both a cover and a tool. By anticipating reactions and orchestrating chaos, she could manipulate perception, creating the illusion of misfortune or natural calamity. Her preparation reflected both brilliance and moral corruption, an intricate balance of intellect and obsession, of passion and ruthless pragmatism. As the day approached, anticipation mingled with fear. The court, oblivious, moved through its routine, while Drusilla's mind traced each step of the plan repeatedly, rehearsing sequences, calculating contingencies, and visualizing outcomes. She had crossed the threshold from love into lethal obsession, a transformation as intoxicating as it was terrifying. Every heartbeat echoed the gravity of her impending choices, every breath a reminder that her secret could no longer remain hidden without drastic intervention. In the shadows of her chambers, behind the glittering facade of opulence, the Countess prepared to execute a plot that would forever alter the course of her life and the lives of all who shared her court. A calculated act of devotion, obsession, and darkness intertwined. The night that Countess Drusilla's plan came to fruition was cloaked in the deceptive calm of a grand feast. Candles flickered across polished wooden tables, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls and highlighting the intricate patterns of golden embroidery on noble garments. The air was thick with the mingling scents of roasted meats, spiced wine, and fragrant flowers, masking the darkness that was about to descend. Courtiers laughed, clinking goblets in the customary displays of camaraderie and celebration, oblivious to the danger that had been meticulously prepared and hidden within their midst. Drusilla moved among them with her customary grace, smiling, bowing, and engaging in conversation, a picture of poise and control, even as a storm of fear and anticipation roared within her chest. The first signs of the poison's effect were subtle, almost imperceptible. A cough here, a sudden flush there, a hand trembling ever so slightly as it lifted a goblet to the lips. Drusilla observed with a mixture of satisfaction and tension, noting how each intended victim reacted according to her predictions. Some faltered, seeking support from companions, while others attempted to conceal their unease behind polite laughter and forced smiles. The subtlety of the symptoms allowed the court to continue its performance for a time, giving her the illusion of control even as chaos quietly gathered momentum. It was a cruel theater, the opulence of the surroundings contrasting sharply with the suffering that was slowly unfolding at every corner of the great hall. Within moments, the faint unease began to blossom into genuine panic. Courtiers whispered to one another, exchanging worried glances and seeking explanations for the sudden malaise that seemed to touch so many at once. Servants moved quickly, bringing water, fanning faces, and attempting to assess who might require urgent attention, but the sheer number of afflicted individuals created confusion. Drusilla maintained her composure, her face the mask of a concerned host, though inside, a mixture of exhilaration and fear battled for dominance. She knew that any slip, any sign of her inner turmoil, could expose the secret she had worked so hard to conceal. Yet even as she maintained outward calm, she could not help but feel the weight of the horror she had orchestrated, a weight that pressed against her chest with a suffocating intensity. As the poison spread, chaos escalated. Courtiers staggered to their feet, clutching their stomachs or collapsing onto chairs and carpets, their cries echoing through the high-ceilinged room. Some attempted to flee, only to find themselves slowed by confusion and the sheer number of victims. Servants screamed for assistance, while musicians stopped mid-performance, their instruments silenced by the shock of the unfolding disaster. The gilded walls and ornate decorations of the hall, which had moments before reflected the pride and wealth of the Countess's lineage, now seemed to close in with a suffocating presence, bearing silent witness to the suffering within. Every detail, every sound, every movement was amplified by the terror that had erupted, creating a scene of tragic dissonance between beauty and horror. Drusilla's lover remained largely unharmed, shielded by her careful planning, but the sight of suffering across the court did not escape her notice. The thrill of success was mingled with an almost unbearable weight of responsibility, the knowledge that she had not only targeted those who threatened her secret, but had brought profound agony into lives that had trusted in her hospitality. Guilt and exhilaration warred within her, a conflict that intensified as more victims fell. She moved among the afflicted with the precision of a conductor directing a deadly symphony, ensuring that her plan remained intact, and yet, beneath the surface, An unsettling recognition of the human cost pressed heavily on her conscience. It was the first moment when the magnitude of her actions began to crystallize in a way that could no longer be contained by secrecy or strategy alone. The subtle artistry of the poison revealed itself fully in the hours that followed. Some courtiers lingered between life and death, their suffering prolonged in ways that seemed almost theatrical, while others succumbed swiftly, leaving behind gasps, convulsions, and the stark stillness of mortality. Drusilla's calculated choice of substances had ensured that the symptoms mimicked natural illnesses, delaying suspicion and providing the illusion of chance or divine misfortune. Yet the sheer scale of the tragedy, so many affected in such a short span of time, could not be entirely masked, and murmurs of unease began to ripple through the remaining observers. Fear spread faster than the poison itself, infecting the minds of those who had yet to be harmed, creating a secondary epidemic of panic that Drusilla had anticipated but could not fully control. The drama of that night was heightened by the contrast between public display and private reality. Courtiers attempted to maintain dignity, fainting discreetly into the arms of companions or whispering reassurances, while Drusilla's heart raced with a mixture of triumph and terror. The opulent feast, meant to display wealth and harmony, had become a scene of death, revealing the fragility of human lives against the calculated will of one determined individual. It was a masterful orchestration of both psychology and chemistry, a demonstration of power exercised not through armies or politics, but through intellect, planning, and the most intimate forms of control. Drusilla's brilliance and obsession were in full display, and yet the cost was a tableau of horror that would haunt her and the court for the rest of their lives. As dawn approached, the hall was littered with the aftermath of the night's events. Courtiers lay in varying states of suffering, servants wept over their charges, and the grandeur of the chamber was forever marred by the shadow of death. Drusilla stood among them, outwardly composed, inwardly processing the enormity of what she had unleashed. Her secret remained safe, her forbidden love preserved, yet the moral and emotional ramifications were undeniable. She had crossed a line from passion into calculated murder, and the court, once a place of beauty and decorum, had been transformed into a stage of terror, a setting where elegance and horror collided in a way that would be remembered for generations. The tragedy had unfolded as she intended, but at a cost that no planning or cunning could entirely assuage, leaving Drusilla to navigate the consequences of a night that blurred the boundary between love and monstrous obsession. The morning after the tragic events, the once vibrant court of Countess Drusilla had transformed into a scene of whispered fear and palpable suspicion. The lingering shadows of death and illness clung to every corridor, every ornate chamber, as courtiers exchanged hushed conversations about the inexplicable maladies that had swept through their ranks. While Drusilla moved among them with her characteristic poise, offering measured condolences and feigned concern, her mind was a storm of calculation, observation, and strategic foresight. She understood that the danger of exposure had shifted from potential to imminent. The court would demand explanations, and any misstep could unravel the carefully maintained facade she had built around her forbidden love and her deadly secret. Magistrates and investigators, summoned from nearby towns and distant territories, arrived with an air of solemn authority. Their presence introduced a new level of scrutiny that was both threatening and electrifying. The officials carried instruments, records, and rudimentary methods of inquiry, seeking patterns and inconsistencies that might reveal the truth. They questioned servants, allies, and even those who had survived the poison's effects, piecing together accounts of symptoms, meals, and movements. Drusilla, ever the adept manipulator of perception, responded with careful composure, providing plausible explanations while subtly directing suspicion away from herself. Every interaction was a high-stakes performance, a delicate balance between honesty and deception, aimed at preserving her position, her secret, and, above all, her forbidden love. The psychological tension during these days was immense. Drusilla's mind was constantly active, anticipating questions, predicting lines of inquiry, and analyzing the behavior of both investigators and courtiers. She understood that any emotional lapse, any flicker of guilt or anxiety, could reveal more than words ever could. Yet the intensity of the situation also tested her moral boundaries, forcing her to reconcile the human cost of her actions with her personal desire. Each conversation, each observation, reinforced the stakes. Her freedom, reputation, and very life now depended on a combination of wit, timing, and relentless vigilance. The court, once a place of social ceremony and grandeur, had become a pressure cooker of suspicion, fear, and moral uncertainty. Alliances and rivalries among the courtiers complicated matters further. Some sought to curry favor with investigators, offering observations and suggestions that could implicate others, while others worked quietly to protect Drusilla, aware of her intelligence, influence, and the possible personal benefit of remaining in her good graces. This web of competing interests created an environment where truth was elusive and loyalty was conditional. Drusilla skillfully navigated these dynamics, using charm, subtle threats, and calculated displays of generosity to maintain control. She understood that perception could be as powerful as fact, and that the careful orchestration of appearances might be the only shield between her and the inevitable consequences of her crime. Suspicion, however, was like a living entity within the court, growing and shifting in unpredictable ways. Courtiers observed one another, noting unusual behaviors, secretive gestures, and discrepancies in accounts of the night's events. Servants, who had witnessed small but critical details, became both potential threats and invaluable instruments, depending on how carefully they were managed. Drusilla engaged in constant mental calculations, weighing whom she could trust, whose loyalty was genuine, and whose curiosity might inadvertently expose her. Her psychological acuity, honed through years of navigating court intrigue, was now applied to survival and deception, turning her intellect into both a weapon and a shield in the face of looming scrutiny. The investigators' methods, while rudimentary by modern standards, were thorough and relentless. They examined meals, drink vessels, and personal effects, noting inconsistencies and anomalies. Symptoms of poisoning were cataloged and compared, and patterns began to emerge that suggested the possibility of deliberate action. Drusilla, fully aware of this growing clarity, intensified her vigilance. She orchestrated subtle diversions, guided conversations away from sensitive topics, and exploited the investigators' assumptions about class, gender, and expected behavior. Every gesture, every word, every carefully staged reaction was a calculated maneuver to keep her secret secure, even as the walls of suspicion pressed closer. Throughout this tense period, the contrast between her outward appearance and inner turmoil was stark. Drusilla's public persona remained composed, graceful, and supportive as she attended to the sick, reassured anxious courtiers, and maintained her authority. Privately, however, she grappled with fear, guilt, and the constant mental exertion required to anticipate the next threat. The forbidden love that had driven her to this point remained a motivating force, a secret anchor amidst the chaos. Yet it also amplified the stakes, reminding her that the consequences of failure would not only be personal, but could destroy the relationship she valued most. Every step was a delicate balance between deception, strategic foresight, and the relentless pursuit of survival. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that the outcome would depend as much on psychological manipulation as on the actual evidence. Drusilla's ability to maintain appearances, to shape perceptions, and to subtly redirect attention became her greatest asset. She understood that the human mind is easily influenced, that fear, uncertainty, and gossip could be wielded as tools as effectively as any physical defense. With calculated precision, she navigated this treacherous terrain, ensuring that every move, every conversation, and every gesture contributed to the preservation of her secret and the protection of her forbidden love. The court, still vibrant with opulence and ceremony, had become a chessboard of strategy, intrigue, and suspense, and Countess Drusilla was both the architect and the primary player in this deadly game. The aftermath of the poisoning plunged the court into a storm of uncertainty, fear, and moral reckoning. By the time dawn fully illuminated the gilded halls of Countess Drusilla's palace, the extent of the tragedy had become undeniable. The sick and dying lay sprawled across chamber floors and banquet halls. Servants tended desperately to those still conscious, and the murmur of suspicion had grown into a low, insistent chorus that echoed through corridors and across courtyards. News of the calamity spread beyond the palace walls, carried by frightened couriers and whispered in market squares, and soon reached distant towns and neighboring courts. Drusilla, poised and unflinching in public, understood that the delicate equilibrium of secrecy she had maintained was now under severe threat. Every action from this point forward would carry consequences that could determine not only her survival, but the very legacy of her name. Investigators intensified their scrutiny. Magistrates returned with greater authority, bringing assistance, rudimentary testing methods, and a meticulous desire to reconstruct the events of the previous night. They questioned survivors and witnesses, cross-examined servants, and examined food, drink, and ceremonial implements for anomalies. Drusilla observed their methods closely, noting the assumptions they made, the conclusions they drew, and the biases inherent in their process. Some investigators relied heavily on superstition, attributing sudden deaths to divine will or malefic spirits, while others attempted to discern deliberate patterns in the chaos. She used this to her advantage, subtly reinforcing the former while guiding the latter away from incriminating conclusions. Every interaction required precision, a careful blending of truth, suggestion, and misdirection designed to preserve her secret and maintain her social standing. Rumors, naturally, began to swirl like wildfire. Courtiers speculated about the causes of the mass illness, attributing it to everything from contaminated wine to divine punishment. Some whispered of foul play, their voices barely audible over the background of grief and panic. The tension was heightened by the presence of powerful individuals who had their own agendas, political rivals seeking to exploit the chaos, ambitious courtiers angling for greater influence, and loyal allies who offered counsel that was both cautious and self-serving. Drusilla navigated these treacherous dynamics with a calculated mix of charm, persuasion, and subtle intimidation. She recognized that perception was as crucial as fact, that those who controlled the narrative could shape the outcome, and that a single misstep could tip suspicion directly onto her shoulders. Emotionally, the aftermath weighed heavily on her. Despite the careful planning and strategic brilliance that had guided her actions, Drusilla could not escape the human cost of the tragedy she had orchestrated. Each death, each cry of pain, each expression of fear or confusion was a stark reminder of the moral abyss into which she had descended. Yet intertwined with this burden was a persistent sense of triumph. Her forbidden love remained concealed, her secret intact, and the court still held her in regard, unaware of the true architect of the calamity. This duality, guilt mingled with exhilaration, created an inner tension that was nearly as consuming as the events themselves. Drusilla's intellect and emotional resilience were pushed to their limits, shaping her into a figure both sympathetic and horrifyingly calculating. The court itself was irrevocably altered. Those who survived were forever changed by the experience, their perception of Drusilla, of nobility, and of safety transformed. Trust became a fragile commodity, loyalty a conditional measure, and fear an omnipresent companion. Drusilla, aware of this shift, used it to her advantage, consolidating influence among the remaining courtiers and ensuring that her position remained secure. Yet she also knew that long-term consequences could not be entirely controlled. Histories would be written, stories would be whispered, and the memory of the night's events would linger like a shadow over her court and her family's legacy. Even if immediate exposure was avoided, the psychological and political impact would ripple outward, shaping perceptions for years to come. If discovery was imminent, Drusilla had prepared contingency plans. Whether it involved temporary retreat to a distant estate, discreet bribery of influential figures, or the manipulation of witnesses and documents, she had crafted multiple avenues to protect herself. Her strategic foresight reflected both brilliance and desperation, a combination that allowed her to navigate the delicate balance between survival and exposure. At the same time, she understood that such maneuvers required constant vigilance and adaptability. Every step in these efforts was calculated to maintain her secret while buying time to secure her position preserve her forbidden love, and, if necessary, escape entirely from the consequences of her actions. The reactions of her forbidden lover further complicated the aftermath. While largely shielded from suspicion due to Drusilla's careful planning, he began to sense the gravity of the events, the ripple effects of the suffering surrounding them, and the precariousness of their position. Drusilla's role as protector and orchestrator became increasingly central to the relationship, intertwining love, secrecy, and mutual dependence. The psychological complexity of their connection was amplified by shared knowledge of the danger and the moral ambiguity inherent in their survival. Together, they navigated a world transformed by death, suspicion, and intrigue, a fragile bond cemented through shared complicity and the constant awareness of peril. Ultimately, the aftermath was a complex tapestry of human emotion, societal pressure, and strategic calculation. Drusilla's brilliance, cunning, and capacity for deception allowed her to maintain control in a court now wary, haunted, and forever changed. The events left behind a dual legacy. Public perception framed her as an elegant, composed, and powerful countess, while those who understood the subtle truths would forever recognize the darkness that had propelled her actions. The court continued to function, yet beneath the polished surface, the memory of suffering, the potential for suspicion, and the weight of her secret remained ever present, a shadowed reminder of the intersection between love, obsession, and deadly ambition. The shadow of Countess Drusilla's actions stretched far beyond the immediate tragedy of her court. Years later, historians and chroniclers would recount the events with a mixture of awe, horror, and disbelief, recognizing that the combination of passion, secrecy, and calculated cruelty had left an indelible mark on her era. The poisonings, though meticulously orchestrated, became more than a tale of crime. They were a window into the complexities of human desire, ambition, and moral compromise. Drusilla's court, once a symbol of refinement and grandeur, became a case study in the perilous intersection of love and power, showing how even the most cultivated society could be shattered by personal obsession. The psychological legacy of her actions was equally profound. Scholars and observers noted the duality in her character. The same woman capable of exquisite charm and strategic brilliance could also meticulously orchestrate death to protect a forbidden desire. This contrast fascinated and horrified in equal measure, offering insight into the human capacity for both tenderness and cruelty. Drusilla's life became a cautionary tale. Her intelligence and passion, when untempered by ethical constraints, could become instruments of profound destruction. The forbidden love that had ignited her plan was transformed in historical memory into both a symbol of consuming desire and a catalyst for catastrophe, illustrating the dangers inherent in allowing personal obsession to eclipse moral judgment. Culturally, the story of Countess Drusilla influenced perceptions of noble women, power, and secrecy in ways that resonated for generations. Her narrative was whispered in salons and courts, appearing in plays, songs, and letters, always with the emphasis on her beauty, cunning, and moral ambiguity. In some accounts, she was vilified as a murderer, a woman whose love was so dangerous it had to be eradicated along with those who witnessed it. In others, she was romanticized as a tragic figure, caught between societal expectation and the imperatives of her heart. These interpretations reflected broader societal tensions about gender, power, and desire, demonstrating how a single act of calculated violence could echo across centuries, shaping discourse around morality, ambition, and human emotion. The historical context surrounding her deeds further amplified their impact. Drusilla lived in a time when noble lineage, social standing, and political alliances determined survival, influence, and legacy. Women, even those of high rank, faced strict limitations, with marriages arranged for political convenience and personal desires often subordinated to duty. Within this environment, Drusilla's forbidden love represented both defiance and desperation. Her choice to resort to poison was not merely a crime of passion, but also a response to structural pressures and societal constraints. By framing her story within the cultural and historical norms of her time, historians have shown that her actions, while morally reprehensible, were also a calculated assertion of agency in a world that afforded her few legitimate avenues to protect her love and autonomy. The fascination with Drusilla's narrative extends into the psychological and literary realm as well. Writers and thinkers have examined her story as an early example of how obsession can drive even the most disciplined minds to extremes. Her meticulous planning, her attention to detail, and her ability to manipulate perception demonstrate a level of intellectual rigor applied to an ethically compromised objective. The tension between her public facade and private transgressions provides a lens through which to explore broader human themes. The capacity for deception, the allure of power, and the moral ambiguity that accompanies acts of intense personal motivation. In this sense, Drusilla's legacy is not confined to historical records, but extends into the realms of psychology, literature, and cultural mythology. The story also prompted reflection on the nature of justice and consequence in the historical period. Drusilla's survival, escape, or punishment, depending on which accounts are considered, highlighted the complexities of law, gender, and power. Even when suspicion arose, her ability to manipulate social and political structures allowed her to evade immediate retribution, underscoring how privilege could shield individuals from accountability. This aspect of her legacy sparked debates that continue among historians. How personal cunning, social influence, and gender expectations could intersect to produce outcomes both shocking and instructive. Drusilla's life thus became a prism through which the mechanics of historical justice, societal bias, and moral responsibility could be examined in depth. Finally, the lasting resonance of Drusilla's actions lies in the human fascination with the darker side of history. Her story blends romance, obsession, and calculated cruelty in a narrative that captivates as much today as it did in her own time. The combination of forbidden love, societal pressure, and lethal strategy creates a timeless tension, one that allows modern audiences to explore the complexities of human desire, ambition, and ethical compromise. Her court, forever changed by her choices, remains a symbol of both elegance and danger, a reminder that behind gilded walls and perfumed halls, darkness often hides just out of sight. Drusilla's legacy is therefore both cautionary and compelling, a testament to the enduring power of secrecy, passion, and moral ambiguity in shaping history and memory.